Hello and welcome to the Unlocking Behaviour Change Podcast, the show all about psychology and changing behaviour. My name is Jamie West and I'm joined by Professor Emeritus Robert West. How are you today, Robert?
I'm good. It's a little chilly out there, but the sun is shining and it's not too windy. So had a very nice cup of coffee in a new coffee place that we haven't tried before. And I managed to get a cortado, which was exactly the right size.
What is a cortado?
Cortado is essentially a double espresso with the same amount of milk as the coffee, with a little bit of foam, or not foam, sort of microfoam on the top. And let me tell anyone out there who might be running a cafe or a restaurant that does cortados that are the size of soup bowls, that's not a cortado.
Well, you did do a blog post on your Substack all about coffee and trying to standardize the way in which coffees are described.
I did. I'd had enough, to be honest. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, wrong in the world. But, seriously, the whole issue of getting cortados that are the size of lattes and flat whites that, only have one shot and so on, it's just not really good enough. So I did a Substack post on it called something like, what was it? A flat white by any other name. But the serious point in it was to introduce people to the idea of ontologies, because ontologies are going to be very much the future of behavioral science, and they're going to be how we get a better result out of our AI when it comes to interacting with it, asking questions of computers, because computers can understand what we're saying when we talk ontology speak.
What is an ontology?
An ontology is a way of expressing information that conforms to a very specific and tight structure of the sort of subject, verb, object type framing, where every construct, everything that you talk about, literally anything, whether it's behavior or whether it's your liver or the sun, every construct has a unique definition, which is precise and conforms to a particular standard. A unique ID, which means that people can always refer to it uniquely, and you know exactly what you're talking about. And the constructs are related to each other in ways that are very clearly defined. Now, you might think, well, blimey, that sounds a bit basic. It is.
No one was thinking that sounded basic. People were going, hang on, what are you talking about? Let me just see if I can put that into normal speak for people. Essentially, an ontology is where you have agreed definitions of things which then have unique identifiers. So everyone always knows they're very specific and probably made according to a kind of a template so that it's very clear exactly what everyone is referring to. So when you're using a word like flat white, in your example, it means that people are referring to exactly the same thing, not a kind, it's trying to make something that is actually quite subjective currently, as in our own personal definitions of things, and trying to get them to be as objective as possible. Is that about right?
That's pretty good, Jamie. Very good. It is all of that and more, because what you can also do with ontologies is in specifying formal relations between things, you can reason with them. So if you know that a flat white is an example or a subclass of milk-containing coffee drink, then you know that all the features of milk-containing coffee drink will also apply to a flat white. So there's various other relations as well. So you can reason with it, and you can specify what's known as axioms. For example, you can say the disjointness axiom. You can say, well, if it's a flat white, it can't be a cortado, right? It can't be both a cortado and a flat white, and various things like that. And you're absolutely right, Jamie, to say that the key, probably the single most important thing, is that when you use a term or an ID relating to a class of objects or things, everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. And what's also incredibly important is the computer knows what you're talking about. So when you prompt your AI large language model with a query and you use terms and you say, I'm using these terms using the behavior change intervention ontology or behavior change technique ontology, it can go and look it up and say, oh, right, I know exactly what you mean. And if we start, the more and more we start doing that, the more we will be able to get much more precise information from our AI friends.
So does that work at the moment then? If I were to put into chat this, what did you just say? Can you say that again?
The behavior change intervention ontology.
Behaviour change
and yes, absolutely. If you ask ChatGPT or Claude.ai, which is the one I mainly use, a question along the lines of, I have, let's say, a group of smokers in Manchester, and I want to know what does the research tell us are the most effective behavior change techniques using the BCT ontology. It knows the BCT ontology to prompt people to come to use the stop smoking services in Manchester. Then, because you've told it that to use the BCT ontology, it will then find that and it will then look up the research for the for the behavior change techniques that have been studied in that, and it'll give you a pretty good answer and much better answer than you would have got if you just said, oh, how can I best get people to attend the stop smoking services in Manchester.
Wow. So I can see why you're excited about this, because it does seem like it could be game changing in terms of getting much more specific and helpful information in relation. I suppose you're doing it in relation to stop smoking services at the moment, but it's not just that, is it?
No, we're doing it in relation to all behaviors. In the comments, or the bit blurb below, I'll give a link to the website that covers it. But the idea really is that not only can we search the existing literature using the ontology, but increasingly people will start to use the ontology when they're writing their papers, so that the papers are already computer readable. And some of the listeners may know that for many years now, I've been working on a thing called the paper authoring tool, which is a way of writing up research reports, particularly randomized trials. And we're just finishing the latest sort of update of this tool, which should be ready in a couple of weeks. Hopefully, where all the constructs in it can be ontologized, and it tells you how to look them up and so on, so that anyone who's done a systematic review will know how time-consuming and difficult and often subjective it is. As we go forward in behavioral science and in clinical sciences and other science, social sciences, you won't have to do that. You won't have this sort of quite subjective, time-consuming and difficult process of extracting the information from papers. They will all be ontologized by the people who are writing them.
So people familiar with the sciences will be familiar with the concept of soft science and hard sciences. And soft sciences generally would be considered things like, I'm just speaking off the top of their head here, from what I've heard, things like sociology would be more on the softer end of the sciences, and the harder end would be elements of physics and things where you can get very specific data. You explain it, because I feel like I'm running out of gas here.
No, those are terms that are used. I think they're becoming somewhat blurred, or they have become somewhat blurred.
Well, I was going to say that it sounds like these tools are moving to a harder science in the areas of psychology. That was the point I was moving towards.
Yes, that's right. Psychology, sociology, and so on. Now, that's not to say that there aren't areas, particularly of social sciences, where people would want to maintain the kind of subtlety and nuance that you can get by using language in the traditional way and accepting the ambiguities that arise from it. And it's sort of this kind of interface between science and art, as it were. So, just as Shakespeare contains some amazing insights into human nature and beautifully expresses them in ways that can capture people's imagination in a way that, the sort of onto speak wouldn't do. There's a place for that. There's definitely a place for that. But where you're trying to make, quite firm statements and generalizations and create laws of the sort that we have in physics and so on with regard to behavior and mental processes, then you need to move more towards the ontologized version. So that may, which is the main way that we do social and behavioral sciences. So the ontologies will move us more towards that.
So tell us a little bit about how this came to be that you became interested in ontologies, and how then this has developed into quite a complex thing involving many people who you're working with.
It arose because Susan Mickey, who, as many listeners will know, is my partner, came up with a vision for how behavioral science could progress much, much more rapidly and effectively. And the vision was to harness the power of AI to do a lot of the sort of legwork that currently, we do as humans and takes forever. So let's say you're trying to estimate the likely effect of a new behavior change intervention. Let's say an intervention to get away from smoking. Let's take one to reduce knife crime in the UK, right? So that's an important intervention. Now, where we are at the moment is there's lots of studies that have been done on that, randomized trials, observational studies, and so on. But the language that they use and the way they describe the results has been, using the sort of language you and I would use in everyday life. And they put numbers to things and they measure things. But it's incredibly difficult to synthesize that information because of the idiosyncrasies in the way we've expressed what we've done and what we've found. And so a precursor to being able to use AI in this way to massively upgrade our ability to synthesize information is to have a common language, a common way of representing the information, so that we can see what relates to what studies have been done on what. We can find the research we need much more easily. And that's where ontologies came in. So, and this was about seven years ago or so. So, the first job really, which is still ongoing, it's always an ongoing thing, this, was to create an ontology which would capture all the bits of information that we need, the different kinds of behavior that there are, the different kind of things you can do in your interventions, what we call the modes of delivery, like is it going to be through an app, or is it going to be through posters or counseling or training sessions or whatever, settings, the kind, is it going to be in the workplace, is it going to be in a GP surgery, and so on. So all of these things, we've been created this very large ontology which captures all these classes and gives all these classes unique IDs, so that we can go back to the papers that have been written already and we can what's known as annotate them. That's to say we can say whenever anyone mentions one of these classes, we can say, well, that is this one and it's got this ID. And then you put all this together, and then with that, you can use machine learning to identify patterns that you could never have seen in a million years as a human.
It sounds like a massive job looking back over the history of all these different studies that have taken place and then annotating them. Are you using machines to do that work as well?
The original idea, which we didn't know whether it would succeed, was to automate the process. And we partnered with IBM Research in that phase of the process to use natural language processing to see if we could automate this process. And it did okay, but it didn't do it well enough. But this was before the advent of these new generation of large language models, the ChatGPT models and so on. It used a sort of precursor to those, and it wasn't really good enough. So we were reliant on human annotation. And as you rightly say, it's a huge amount of work. In the case of smoking trials, for example, we annotated over 500 trials with over 1,000 intervention conditions with something like 100 or so features annotated per study. You can imagine the amount of work involved. This really isn't feasible to do manually, going forward for the whole of behavioral science. So we've been working very hard with partners, UCL and other places, to see whether how far the new generation of AI systems can automate this process. And we're making some progress. It turns out that the easier things, the things that AI can do rather better, are things like identifying behavior change techniques. You can put a passage of text in, and with the right prompts and a bit of additional training, you can get it to identify what behavior change techniques were used pretty well. Not 100%, but it's certainly a massive advance on just trying to do it by hand. And that's what we're working on at the moment, is getting tools that can do this better and better, so that, as you say, we can massively accelerate the rate at which we can annotate papers and create this large database of research.
And so is the idea that you actually have a lot of the knowledge already there in previous studies, that you just don't know how to put it together. It's so many studies. So actually the work has been done, but what needs to happen is for that data to be analyzed and therefore become useful, and we can understand connections we wouldn't otherwise ever see.
That's exactly right. In the classic evidence synthesis or meta-analysis, which is a statistical aggregation of results, you can only really capture a tiny, tiny amount of the information that's contained in those original papers. With capturing all the information about what's in the interventions, the behavior change techniques, the modes of delivery, the populations, their characteristics, the settings, and the types of behavior, all of that information, it's all there in the papers, waiting to be used. And so we're wasting about 90%, at least 90% of the information that's being gathered. And so the more we can automate the annotation, the more we can extract from this, and we can build what I would consider to be a real science of behavioral change. At the moment, I think it's not to, in any way decry the successes that have been made. There have been huge advances made, but I would still put us at the sort of level of a cottage industry where we've got little workshops all doing our own thing and not necessarily learning what the big picture is. If we can industrialize this, through the use of ontologies and AI, it'll take everything to a much, much higher level.
Let's talk about that. Where do you see this going, and who do you see using the information that you have developed? Is this governments across the world? Is it small organizations? Is it an individual?
What we're already seeing is all of those. We see that government departments who are developing policies can use, even what we've done so far. For example, we've built a prediction tool which is online and free, and I'll put a link to it in the notes underneath. But basically what it does is it allows you to get a prediction of what the success rates are likely to be for smoking cessation interventions that have never been tried before. Novel smoking cessation interventions based on what they contain, what their behavior change techniques are, and who it is that you're targeting, for example. So, and that can help with policymakers. It can help with service development. But what we're also seeing is now an increasing number and sophistication of behavioral science organizations, commercial organizations sometimes, and sometimes not-for-profits, who are using this technology to develop tools to work with their clients to achieve their results, whether it's getting more people to attend a gym or to stay as members of a gym, or to tackle issues of violence in the workplace, or pretty well anything. So it's already happening, and I think we're still pretty much at the foothills of it. It's still. I would say probably most people working in behavioral science don't know what ontologies are and don't know about how they can be used to improve the way we interact with AI. But this is going to change rapidly over the next couple of years, I think. So watch this space.
And if people want to find out more, we've said that, you'll put information in the link, but if they want to learn more about ontologies in general and how they might be useful, where should they go? What should they look at?
YouTube is a good source, actually. If you put ontologies in YouTube and ontologies in behavioral science in YouTube, then you very quickly start to learn what they involve. I mean, this is not new. In biology, for example, very famously, probably the most successful ontology in science is what's known as the gene ontology. And this was developed in order to unify the science of molecular biology so that people knew what they were talking about in different labs when they were doing their studies and reporting their findings. There's a lot of stuff out there on ontologies. I have to say also that if you do put ontologies into your search engine and so on, ironically, the search engine is using ontologies to find the answers for you. The web is run basically on ontologies, not the sort of scientific ontologies that we are interested in, where everything's connected to everything else and we work to a common conceptual structure, but as a way of organizing the data within those search engines. So ontologies have been already transformative in our experience of working with computers. And what we're doing really is bringing that technology into behavioral science.
So this sounds, really very exciting to me. Have you got any pushback from this approach?
Yes, and with some justification, because one of the things that people are, I think, most concerned about is that if you say this is how something has to be defined, and you're talking about constructs in psychology or behavioral science or sociology, where different people may want to define it differently. They say, well, no, hang on a minute. Let's take something like addiction. Different people have different views on what addiction is. And that's perfectly understandable. You don't want one group of people, me and Susan and others, just going, well, this is how you've got to talk about these things. That wouldn't work at all. That would just narrow our science in a way that would be very unhelpful. The key response to that is ontologies, and this is a slightly subtle point, but it's a really important one. Ontologies don't tell you what words mean. So when I have a construct and I give it a label addiction, I'm not saying that's what addiction is. What I'm saying is, here's a construct that you might be interested in. I'm using the label addiction so that you can have a general idea what I'm talking about. But most importantly, it's got a unique ID that the computer can find and you can find if you look it up. And that relates to this definition. So the definition is the thing. The label is secondary to the definition. So what that means is someone else can come along and say, I've got a different definition. And because I'm not, I hear what you're saying, but this isn't what I'm mostly interested in. And this isn't how I look at it. And that definition gets a unique ID. And then very powerfully and usefully, when you're dealing with areas where different people have different sort of perspectives on something, the ontology can be used to see how those two relate to each other. In what way are they different and in what way are they similar? If you go back to addiction, for example, for a whole swathe of people working in psychiatry particularly, they would construe addiction as a disorder, a clinical disorder. Which you either got it or you haven't got it. And if you've got it, you can have it to different degrees of severity. Now, other people working in the field say, well, hang on a minute, that's not how I look at it. I look at addiction as a dimension. People can be more or less addicted to something, and it doesn't necessarily have to be considered to be a clinical disorder. It could be, it's just something which, could exist to varying degrees. In ontologies, both of those constructs have validity. They're both real, and the definitions of those constructs are there in the ontology, but they're given different IDs. And when you're creating ontologies, it's helpful to use terms to label these things that help people not to get confused. So the first of these we would call, let's say, addiction disorder or addictive disorder. And the second you can call addiction dimension or addiction disposition. And then people can go, okay, that's fine. I'm interested in this one, you're interested in that one, and the two are related, but they're not the same thing. So the pushback, which is, well, you're just creating a sort of hegemony of this is how you've got to look at things, is perfectly understandable, but it's not actually what's going on.
Well, so you're making finer and finer discriminations, and there's a kind of a neutral tone to it, which means that it's not kind of, this is my view of what addiction is, and that is the view, and I'm now in charge of what addiction is.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. The key is about accuracy and transparency and having a coherent semantic structure rather than dictating. So it's ontological definitions are very different from dictionary definitions. That's the key.
Wow. Anyway, that's been quite an exciting, interesting episode. It's sort of very technical, but I can see how it could really propel things along in behavioral science. And it could be so incredibly useful to mine the information we already have and all the research that has been paid for and can be put to use. But that's about all we've got time for this week. So it remains for me to say thank you very much, Professor Robert Emeritus. Good work there.
Thank you.
And do have a look in the links in the description below. And we look forward to joining you next time on the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast.